Holy smokes, fellas. It's hot. I mean, it's hot. We're still under this heat dome right now. Hopefully see some relief coming next week. But oh my goodness. All right, that brings me to today's video. And we're going to talk about at least 5 things that will cause your air conditioner on your car to not work. Alright guys, so I thought it might be a good idea to discuss how an AC system works. Thought we might cover some of the basics. Not going to go over all the nuanced differences between all the different AC systems out there. They all basically work the same. So I thought we would start here at the compressor, and the refrigerant comes out of the compressor as a high pressure gas, travels along the AC line and through to the condenser, which is out in front of the radiator. As the refrigerant travels down through the condenser, it changes over to a high pressure liquid and exits the condenser, and generally goes through a dryer with a filter in it. So it will actually remove any moisture or trap any debris that might happen to be left in the system. The refrigerant continues to travel through an AC line as high pressure liquid until it gets back here by the firewall. Generally speaking, there is a orifice tube or an expansion valve which is connected to the evaporator core, which is located inside the dash. The refrigerant changes over in the expansion valve from a high pressure liquid to a low pressure liquid. As it passes through the inside coils of the evaporator coil, it changes over and begins to boil and goes back to a low pressure gaseous state. So it returns out of the evaporator coil through a line that you can see there, and makes a big loop and comes back down to the compressor, and it starts the cycle all over again. So as you can see, there are some mechanical components and some chemistry that goes into making the air conditioning system work. There's a lot of moving parts, and if even one of those components is not working correctly, your AC begins to either fall off and not work at all, or only partially work. So we're going to talk now about the 5 most common things that I see wrong with AC systems, and generally what you have to do to fix them. We're going to start with number 5. As a general rule, what I see with AC systems that are not cooling properly or not cooling at all, people turn the fan on and the fan doesn't blow. This can be several different things. In my particular case, the blower motor is located under the dash. A lot of imports are that way. But if you're working on an American make, Ford or Chevrolet, some of the older makes, blower motor is actually located outside underneath the hood. Alright, so let's discuss a couple of things with the blower motor. You get in your vehicle, you go to crank it, and you go to adjust your fan control, and you turn your fan switch all the way to high, nothing happens. So you back the fan down 1 notch and the fan begins to blow. And it will only work on the medium speeds, but it will not blow at high speed. As a general rule, most vehicles have a high speed blower fan relay because it is a high amp circuit, so they control it generally with a high amp relay somewhere in one of your circuit panels, fuse boxes. Sometimes they're under the hood, sometimes they're under the dash. Usually if you have an owner's manual to the vehicle, you can flip through and it will identify where that relay is located, and you can try replacing it, test it, or replace it and see if you can get your blower motor to blow on high. That actually happens to be what's wrong with this truck, and I do know that the high speed blower motor relay is defective on this vehicle, but it's a work truck and it blows hard enough on level 3 that I stay plenty cool. Scenario number 2 with your blower fan. You get in the vehicle, you crank it up, you turn the fan on, absolutely nothing happens. Fan doesn't come on, it won't blow, it doesn't matter what you do. Try this. If you know where the blower motor is located, turn the blower motor on. Take a small hammer and gently bump the blower motor. If the blower motor begins to spin, that tells you that the blower motor is beginning to fail. Now, when you replace the blower motor, it is a good practice that if it has a blower motor resistor in line, that you replace the blower motor resistor and the blower motor at the same time. Okay, so now you say, I bumped the blower motor, nothing is still happening. So, you need to go to your fuse panel. Go into the fuse panel and check the fuse that controls the operation of the blower motor and see if the fuse is good. If the fuse is not good, if the fuse has been blown, replace it with the same amperage fuse that you pulled out, pop back another one in, turn the blower motor on, and see if it blows again. If it blows instantly or shortly thereafter you put the fuse in, there is either a dead short in the system, or possibly you could have a blower motor that's failing and drawing too many amps and causing the fuse to blow. Problem number 4 that can cause your AC system to not function properly. On this older truck, it actually had 3 fan belts. It had one for your alternator and water pump, one for the power steering, and one for the AC compressor. Of course, the one for the AC compressor has failed and broken and fallen off. AC compressor is not going to turn. Problem number 2 that I have seen cause insufficient cooling is the belt could have stretched over time and be loose and slipping. This is not generally a problem with the serpentine belts, but a slipping serpentine belt can happen. I have seen the serpentine belts slip and never make a noise. My dad ran into that. He had a slipping serpentine belt on his Chevrolet pickup truck. Never made a noise, but he made him think that the alternator was failing. So a slipping serpentine belt can happen, and it can cause you to think that there's a problem when it's just a simple solution of sometimes just putting a new belt on. So don't let that one get by you. Problem number 3 that I see, AC compressors and AC compressor clutches that have failed. I have an AC compressor here off of a vehicle. Let me back up, set my camera up, and we'll talk about it a little bit. Alright, so I wanted to talk to you about the AC compressor. This is an old AC compressor I had laying around. Make for a good example. As you can see, you have a serpentine belt pulley here, which will turn freely of the AC compressor itself, which allows you to crank the engine and does not have to have the AC compressor spinning. Now, an AC compressor clutch is nothing more than an electromagnet. When you command the AC to come on and tell it on the dash, you turn the switch on, it energizes this electromagnet that is back here mounted to the body of the AC compressor. It energizes and pulls the center hub and locks it to the spinning pulley, which then in turn spins the compressor. What I see a lot of times with the AC compressor clutches is over time they wear, and the two faces will get further and further apart as they wear, and the electromagnetic influence that it has on this outer plate of the clutch is not strong enough to pull in and completely lock the clutch to the spinning pulley. So what happens is your AC system doesn't work. You're getting voltage to the clutch, but the compressor clutch will not pull in and engage. Now, second thing I see with AC compressors, and it's what's wrong with this one now, is they lock up internally. I cannot spin this AC compressor. I don't know exactly what happened to it internally. At one time it was still working, but it has locked up. So if you turn your AC system on and the belt begins to squeal terribly and you disengage the AC and the belt quits squealing, that tells you that the AC compressor is locked up internally. Sometimes when you go to turn the AC compressor on, they can just be noisy and still not produce any cold, which tells you, of course, that the AC compressor has failed internally. And if the AC compressor has failed internally and catastrophically, as a general rule, it's going to be an expensive repair. If the AC compressor clutch has failed and there's nothing wrong internally with the AC compressor, it's recommended that you probably should go ahead and just replace the entire compressor and not try to replace the clutch while it is replaceable and you can put on a clutch. By the time you pay for the labor and by the time you go through all the hassle you have to change a compressor clutch, you could have already stuck a new compressor on, a new dryer, and moved on with life, and the system will last a lot longer and live a lot happier. So, as a general rule, AC clutch repair, yeah, you can do it. Probably shouldn't. Just put a compressor on it. All right, problem number 2, AC system. Things that I see with AC systems that can go wrong. I have a couple examples I can show you in my work truck, a couple of things that I probably need to tend to that I had never noticed before. So, let's take a look at them. All right, one of the things that I see fairly common are AC hose line leaks and AC condenser leaks. First thing we're going to start with is a hose leak. And sometimes these problems can be created accidentally, should we say. In the case of this truck, I know this truck was hit hard on that right side and repaired, and there were a lot of things taken apart and not necessarily put back together correctly, like this AC line right here. As you can see, it's got a lot of flex and movement in it. There's a bracket right here, and there's a clamp right here, a bracket that it's not attached to. So when you're going down the road, this AC line is vibrating up and down. That can cause this metal line that goes back toward the evaporator to, over time, either get a hole rubbed in it or to actually break off. So this is something I'm going to have to look at fixing here. One of the other problems I see are AC condensers. Riding along, as you can see, I didn't take that piece of grill section out right there. That piece of grill section got broke out probably with debris from driving on the road. So if you have a piece of debris come through your grill, you could very easily knock a hole in a condenser. All the freon's gone, and there you go. Okay, so we are down to the last problem. The number one most common thing I see with most AC systems that I mess with that are not mechanically compromised, not mechanically failed, is simply just a little bit low on the refrigerant charge. Some people are going to say, well, you have an AC leak. You need to go hunt and look and see if you can find the leak. No, not necessarily. Particularly with the 134A systems when they came out. One of the things that I learned early on, and it was explained to me, the 134A molecule is a lot smaller than the old years ago R12. So even a tight AC system, you can lose 1/2 to 3/4 of a pound of refrigerant a year and still have what is considered a tight system. If you're only losing 1/2 of a pound to 3/4 of a pound of 134A, you will never find it. Plain and simple. Your best option is Just have them top the system off every couple of years and keep on moving down the line. This is my daughter's 99 Camry. It has the factory AC, has never been touched until the other day. This is what started this whole video series and me wanting to do one on air conditioning work. But due to equipment failure, I was not able to finish filming it. All that was wrong with her AC system was it was 1 can low on refrigerant. What we noticed is back in the spring, it was blowing pretty cold. It felt pretty good. But as the season had gone on and gone on, the hotter it got, it just couldn't do the job anymore. So I attached my AC gauges, checked the pressures, determined that it was low, added a little Freon. That AC system will freeze you out. Alright, so I told you at least 5 AC troubleshooting tips and problems that I come across. Well, you're going to get a bonus today. And this one was caused by me. So, let me get set up and I'll show you what it was. Alright, so let me tell you what the problem I was having with this Nissan. When the first part of the spring started out, AC was blowing cold. Driving it at night, no problem. It would get cool enough. It felt comfortable driving back and forth to work, bring the humidity down. Driving home in the morning, same thing. Humidity would come down. But sometimes I'd drive this vehicle during the day, in the heat of the day, and if I pull up to a traffic light and stop, it just wouldn't get cold anymore. I could rev the engine a little bit, pick the speed of the compressor up, pick the airflow up through the radiator and the condenser, and it would get a little bit cooler. So I was thinking, okay, maybe it's a little bit low on refrigerant. I've never done anything to the AC system on this truck since I've owned it, so I'm thinking possibly it's low on refrigerant. So I hook my AC gauges up to it. At idle, the low pressure side was idling around 50 psi. The high pressure side was up around 300. And I was like, whoa, what's going on? So I said, let me give it a little bit of RPM, pick up the airflow, and try to see if I can make it cool like I do when I was at the red lights. What I noticed was that the low side would pull back down, but the high side would get so high that it would actually cut the AC compressor off. You have a switch in the system that prevents your AC system from either rupturing the hose or damaging the compressor from the high side getting too high. So the limit switch was actually cutting the AC compressor off. And I was thinking, well, maybe something's wrong with the condenser. Maybe it's plugged. So one of the tips and tricks that I suggest people do to test their system to see if it's something to do with airflow through the radiator is to take a water hose and run across the condenser in the front. And if you run a hose across the condenser in the front and your AC pressures come back into line and do what they're supposed to do, there's probably something wrong with your AC condenser. Sometimes they get plugged externally, like if you use a truck on dirt roads, or say you're a farmer and you use a truck out in the field and it gets clogged with hay or gets clogged with seeds or whatever. Sometimes your restriction from airflow can cause these same problems. But no, not in this case. This case is my fault. Back in the winter, I was having a problem with this truck. Even though I put a new thermostat in it, I was having a problem with this truck building heat into the cab of the truck with the heater. So what I did was an old school trick. You take cardboard or some kind of other impervious material and you block off part of the radiator, or in this case it's out in front of the condenser, so that you restrict the airflow going through the radiator, brings the engine temperature up, and helps you provide more heat into the vehicle. This is an old school trick that they used to do years ago with old cars and 18-wheelers, for a matter of fact. They have what's called a winter front. restrict the air going through the radiator, helps bring the temperature up, which helps provide heat for the driver. I forgot that that stuff was still in place. So, let me show you. This is a piece of carpet tile that I cut down to size to help block the flow through the radiator, and ended up destroying my own air conditioner. Well, it's not destroyed, it's just not working properly. And here's the piece of cardboard that was blocking the airflow. I'm sure now that I have it removed, AC will work perfectly. Alright guys, you can see we've definitely made some improvement to the air conditioner. Got some more work to do with the airflow. I think I've got some air bypassing around the sides of the radiator and not getting drawn directly through the shroud. So I've got to get out there and do some work on that. So while I'm out there doing that, why don't you go watch another video coming on the screen right now.